Well, hi there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover the second part of firing projectiles. In the previous section, part one, we had set up 5 new projectile variables. These 5 new projectile variables were the projectile speed, we set up as 10, projectile radius at 5. This variable, the projectile array, we're not using it just yet, but we got it set up. This is our actual projectile. When we see a projectile on the screen, this is the object that will have that projectile in it. And lastly, here on line 32, we got our projectile image. This is the image of the projectile, which will get loaded into the projectile when we want to shoot the projectile. After we set up those 5 variables, we set up some Boolean variables. These are game management variables. Check enemy ship. Check enemy ship, that variable, when we set that to true, that's when we want to check to see if the player vehicle has ran into an enemy ship. When that's true, that's what we're checking for. When check projectile is true, when that's true, we're checking to see has our projectile hit an enemy ship. So those two are going to be involved in game management. And then the last thing we did is we added 2 new text objects. The first text object we added was the instruction 4. Instruction 4 here, where we are telling the player to press the control key to fire. And then we have our win text right here on line 88, where we put our win message on the screen. This will all be getting used. Well, we'll use instruction 4 soon. We already did. We're done with instruction 4. We'll be doing the win text today. So then we went down to the key down method. And in the key down method, we set up some code that detects when we've pressed the control key, made sure the projectile is null, made sure that game active is true. And this allows us, while we're playing, to fire a projectile. Function call goes to fire a projectile, where we create a spawn X and a spawn Y. The point, the XY coordinate where we're going to spawn this projectile. We load the projectile image into the projectile. We set the projectile's position at the spawn X, spawn Y location we just generated, and then we add it to the screen. That gets the projectile on the screen. And then we give it a little push and we move it by, 10 pixels. Next, the move projectile function gets called, and that then takes over and it checks first to see, at the moment, is the projectile variable, is it not equal to null? If it's not equal to null, that means that it has something in it. And in this case, it's got the projectile image. And so it knows it needs to move whatever's in there. It needs to move it. And so it moves it by projectile speed in X, 0, and Y. And I also added this other line, projectile.rotate, which applies a rotation of 30 degrees. Lastly, in the code here, we check to see when the projectile goes off screen, when its X coordinate is greater than the screen width plus the projectile radius. The projectile is completely off the screen, in which case we're going to remove the projectile and set the projectile back to null so we can shoot another projectile. Now that's what we did in class, and our games are all pretty much looking like this. When we press the control key, we can fire. And oops, try not to die, Booth. We're still going to work on getting the collisions with the projectile and the enemies. We also have, that's what's coming. So here we go. The next block of code. Might be nice to add a comment right here. Check if we hit something. I know I said it again right there, but that's really what we're doing here. Well, actually, you know what? Check if, actually, it is really, check if the projectile is still active. Really, that's what's going to happen here, because in this spot, we're going to put the exact same line of code as right there on line 251. When we go through this if statement, there's the possibility that if the projectile's gone off screen, it's been turned into null. If it's been turned into null, then we don't want to do this next thing, which is we want to check again. Is it still not equal to null? After it comes out of this first if statement, if it's still not equal to null, then, well, we need to also check, did it hit something? So that's what we're going to do here now. Check if it hit something. So again, just like we got a spawn X and a spawn Y for the point where we spawned the projectile, now we're going to get a var test X, and that will be equal to the projectile dot, there it is, get X. And to that, we're going to add plus 11. I'll try to have that make sense for you later, how I pulled that 11 magic out of my hat. Var test Y. And that's going to be equal to projectile dot get Y. And we're just going to leave it at that. Projectile dot get Y. Now, I've put an extra blank line in there. I'm going to take that out. Now we're going to check for an element at that spot. We're going to create a var that we're going to call test elm. Test elm. And this test elm, we're going to check to see if it is equal to, and there it is. I just have to type get ele, and there it is, get element at. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to let the Monaco editor type for me because why not? And the point I'm going to put it at is at, there's my test X, comma, test Y. And that's going to be the coordinate. I'm going to check. And I need to set that variable. Check projectile. I need to set check projectile to true because I now want to turn on projectile checking. In order for projectile checking to occur, check projectile's got to be true. And then I'm going to, oh, and I put that in the wrong spot. Let's move that right there and take out the extra line. Yeah, enable checking for the projectile. So check projectile is true. Lastly, we make a function call to check element, passing the test element variable in that function call to check element. So this is the code, and at the moment, I wonder if something will happen. Ah, I got it. Got some kind of error here. So yeah, but no. Well, we're not quite done yet. So we made a function call to test element, to check element, and I guess we must have satisfied the condition for a loss because our loss message came up, and that wasn't supposed to happen. So we better go down to check element and make sure that our check element function is actually handling this object that we're sending, because we're sending this check element, we're sending this test element to the check element function. So I'm going to go down to check element. Check collisions. And check. Okay, so here's the check element function. I'm going to pull this off to the side. So this is the one now that we're sending that test element down here. So we're going to have to modify a little bit our conditions down in this place. Because we're sending this element right now, and when it's going through, it's returning to us. All right, now here's how we're going to handle this. Right here in check collisions. Here, check collisions. We're going to turn some stuff on. We're going to turn some stuff off. Check collisions is involved too. So we're going to start there because it's all going to kind of come together based on what happens in check collisions. We got to affect the way we're sending our elements out, and these are those Boolean variables. These are game management variables. Remember that Boolean variable, check enemy ship? Well, right here, we want to set that equal to true. Because at this point in the code, after we've gotten these test elements in check collision, this is something we did a long time ago. Now we want to check, if we've ran into an enemy ship. So we're going to say check enemy ship is true here. But after we do all these, if we happen to come back to this point, there we go, I got it, paste it. We're going to set it back to false. Hey, there you go. So we've now boxed our function calls to check element. In between, we set the check enemy ship to true, and we send those all off to be checked. And we're finding out whether or not we're running into, if our player object has ran into an enemy ship. Then down here in check element, where we're checking if element is an enemy ship or element is a terrain, in other words, our ship has ran into something, we need to add another condition right here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put a new set of parentheses around the stuff we already have there. So you should have 2 opening parentheses right there, and you should have 2 closing parentheses over here. And in between the last 2 closing parentheses, please put the AND operator, and we want to make sure that check enemy ship is equal to true. So we're looking to see if we're tagged enemy ship or if we're tagged as terrain here. And if we're tagged check enemy ship, if that variable is set to true, then we know that our players run into an enemy ship, or our player has ran into the terrain. That's why the lose function got called. Now, there's something new right here. Check if a projectile has struck an EM man booth spell. It's called spelling. All right. So now what we're checking for here also, this element that we struck with our projectile, we're also checking. We want to know if it is enemy ship. So I'm going to go copy that right there. I'm actually looking for that same fact. I'm looking if that is true. But I could just leave it as just that way, because that implies that it would be true, just even without the equal equals true, just having element is enemy ship. But there's one other thing I need to check for, and that is that check projectile is equal to true. And if check projectile is equal to true, and the element we hit is an enemy ship, well, there's lots of things we have to do. This means that our projectile has struck an enemy ship. If this is true, and that is true, so like that, collapse this just to make me go faster. Lose. We're gonna leave that open. So right here we're at the end of move projectile, the move projectile function. And so at this end right here, this is where we send off that function call to the check element function down here to test element. Take that test element and send it to the check element function. At this point, we set check projectile equal to true. That's going to enable us, when we send this function call to check element, to be checking to see, hey, is the thing we hit, did our projectile hit an enemy ship? And that's how that gets turned on. And so, like I said, there's loads of things we have to do. Oh my gosh. Are you ready? This list is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 things. I might need another line there. Lots of things we have to do here now. So the first thing, remove the elem. That means to remove the enemy ship. We could see this happen right now. Okay. I should be able to press my G key, And bam, took him out. Bam, took him out. Another one. Vanquished. I'm indestructible. Uh-oh, but I ran into the terrain. Well, that's okay. But you should be able to check and see that. Just with that one thing right there, we're taking out the enemy ships because my projectiles picked up that it's hit something, and whatever it hit, now the command is to remove it. All right, so more code. The next thing we have to do besides removing the element, because you notice something here, when I was shooting these right here, the projectile takes out the enemy and the projectile keeps going. In fact, if two enemies were lined up just right, the projectile would take them both out. So we need to also remove the projectile. But before we do that, well, yeah, we could remove the projectile. There it is. Remove projectile. That'll get the now that'll stop when I press. If I hit a target, there we go. See, now the projectile disappears. All right, so got that working. When I shoot, no more projectile. Ooh, hey, but look what happened. Wow, I got a triple shot right there. Okay, that's interesting. So even though it got removed, apparently it was still moving because it was still hitting things. But this next line of code, well, 2 lines of code here is going to take care of it. Tab over here. We're going to set check projectile to false. Because we've already determined we hit something. We hit something, so now that we've hit something, we need to turn that checking the projectile off so we're not looking to see whether or not we hit anything. We hit something. We know it. This projectile hit something. Its life is over. So check projectile, reset back to false. And then this is the thing that... So projectile is now equal to null. And so at this point, when if it were to slide through and hit another one behind and like that, what we just observed a moment ago, there's video even on it, but that problem's taken care of. We won't be having if 2 enemies are lined up, we won't be having multiple hits because the projectile is back to null. It doesn't exist anymore. As soon as we hit that line right there, projectile null, projectile doesn't exist anymore. All right, what else do we need to do? We're going to change the way we're going to be keeping score here. So we're going to set our points equal to points plus 20. And we're going to call the update score function. That way the score will be updated on the screen. And then we have to make an adjustment to our enemy ship offset. Our enemy ship offset needs to be made equal to enemy ship offset minus, and the magic number I came up with was 40. And then the last thing we need to do here is set our, enemies remaining. I'm going to decrease that by 1. I might have just made a syntax error. Yep. My spider sense was tingling. So enemies remaining it's not defined. Where, Mr. Booth? Where did you define it at? Well, it must have been with my enemy variables up at the very top. First, let me find my enemy variables here. There's all my enemy variables. Yep. Oh, notice there's an empty line right here that I left. I missed one. I always do. So this is going to be var enemies remaining, and it's going to be equal to our num enemy ships. So when we initialize this global variable enemies remaining, we're setting it equal to our how many ships we have in our game. So we need that right there. the run button here and hit the G key. And there we go. Took care of that bug. That bug's gone. Now, back down to what we were coding in here in the check element function. All right. Now, that basically, we could, if I wanted to keep playing it over and over, we would be able to take out all the enemies, but it would be kind of anticlimactic because we would have all the enemies gone and nothing would happen. So we're going to make something happen. And that's going to involve this little if statement here. And here we're looking. There it is, enemies remaining. We're looking for when our enemies remaining is equal to 0. Every time we shoot, every time our projectile hits an enemy, the enemy gets removed and enemies remaining gets decreased by 1. That's what enemies remaining minus minus does. So when enemies remaining hits 0, well, we've won. And at that point, we're going to call the win function. There it is, a simple call to the win function. So now with that function call to the win function, we're going to have to go find that. That's in the code here somewhere. And the win function is right here. There's the win function. And so in the win function, we have some things we need to do. They are things that we actually need to be doing in the lose function. The lose function already has it. The lose function's got, see, look at this, stop the timers, ending the game loop and the terrain timers. So I'm going to come down here to the lose function, copy, Control C, and come back up here, select 2 lines and paste, and then hit an enter key to put that blank line. So when we do achieve a win condition, we're going to stop the timers. So the game will stop, the terrains will stop. Then we're going to load our win message to the screen. Again, we can borrow from the lose text. This is pretty easy if you pay attention to what you're doing. Everywhere you see the word lose, you're going to change the word lose to the word win. So here's a lose right there, which I'll make win. There's another lose, which I will make win. Here with the add lose right here, which I will make win. And don't forget about this one tucked in the middle. This one helps get our text centered directly in the middle of the screen. And so, oh, and then there's some Booleans we have to reset. So some Booleans we need to reset here. And that'll be checking the enemy ship, making sure that that's reset to false, and projectile, making sure that is also set to false. And we'll get a win message that'll show up on the screen. Now, in order to test this, to make sure that it really works, I have to be very good. I can't miss. And let's see if I can get it on one pass. No, there's no guarantees. But I'm getting close. I think I got it. Victorious. So yes, it worked. Now that took work, and I got lucky on my first shot. I did. To clear all 8 of them off, I could have failed. But what I could do, if I wanted to just test the functionality of the function call, instead of making my enemies remaining equal to 0 to test, did I get a win? I could put a different number there, like maybe 6, and require me to eliminate at least 3 enemies. So let me see. If I just eliminate 3 enemies now, there goes the pooch, the little puppy, and if I can get 1 more. Now there's 6 of them left. I set the condition to enemies remaining equal to 6, and yep, when I eliminated 3 of them, there were 6 enemies left. Now I'm going to set that back to 0. I'm going to set that back to 0. I'm going to save it, run it, and that's going to complete stage 2 of this project. Now we've got this win functionality built into the game, and We'll get on to the next stage here in the next video.